Welcome back, everyone. So as you can tell, we've done some work. I did actually film some of it. I wasn't really happy with the filming, so I decided to just scrap the footage and we'll just talk through it. At the end of this video, I want to talk a little bit about who my grandfather was and how I came to find this engine shortly before he passed away. And so this was one of, for those of you not really following along, this was my grandfather's, one of his last engines from his collection, and he had owned quite a few antique, mostly throttler engines. I think he had one hit and miss stationary engine at one point, but thought I'd talk a little bit about him, and rather than the engine itself. But anyway, before we get into that, let's talk about some of the work I've accomplished over the past 2 days. So I got the crankshaft out, and here it is. The bearing journals look pretty good. There's not really a lot of scoring. There's some wear, but it's not really scored to hell or anything like that. Here's the PTO end, and here's the flywheel end. Really, everything looks pretty good. I'm impressed, actually, because the bearings or the bushings, they don't look so good. We'll take a look at those in a minute. So I got, as you all know, I got the exhaust pipe off. That was I'm just going to say it, block your ears if you have kids. That was a fucking nightmare. I was a little shocked at how difficult that really was. A little shocked is an understatement. That was a nightmare. But we got it. And I spent the past 2 hours extracting a bolt that broke off right here. It is basically, I got it out, but I'm gonna teach you a lesson. Don't buy. All right. Okay. Everybody nowadays, they want to buy a tool, they go to one of two places. They go to Amazon, or they go to their local Harbor Freight, and they buy the tool, they use it once, and they throw it away. Well, sometimes that's not good enough. And sometimes you have to spend a little bit more money on a better quality tool, because you can end up screwing yourself 6 ways till Sunday by buying a cheap tool. Case in point, this is a bolt extractor kit. Now, this is basically the same quality that you're going to find at your local Harbor Freight. It's good for, the occasional stuck bolt from, whatever you might be working on. It could be what they're not meant for, what this kit isn't meant for, is antique hardened steel bolts rusted in a cast iron block, which, funnily enough, is pretty much what you're going to find in most automobile exhaust manifold removal jobs when you're doing a manifold gasket. This tool is garbage. Don't waste your money. Spend a little bit more money, get a brand name bolt extractor kit. They're going to cost you a little bit. This was $20, and it cost me about $100 worth of aggravation. So starting off with the included reverse drill bits. So your bolt extractor kit comes with different size drill bits and extractors. Each extractor is paired with a bit, and they're reverse threaded. So you put your drill in reverse to drill in. It's counterintuitive, but that's how it works. When they work, I've used these before, they work well. My dad has a Blue Point, I believe, set of extractors, and I've used those countless times to extract rusty, broken exhaust manifold studs. This is the worst thing I've ever seen. So the drill bits that were included, they started to dull almost immediately after using them. So I could only drill halfway into the bolt and no further. It wouldn't go any further. I used oil to keep it cool, and You know, I didn't use a high speed. The bit started dulling almost immediately. Then, once I finally, using a DeWalt bit, I used some of my DeWalt bits. They cut right through that bolt like it was butter. So then, I go to use the extractor. This is one of them. It started to grip, and then I'd tap it in with a hammer, just tap, 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 and then you take your channel or vice grips, you lock them on there, and then you start twisting. And what would happen was the bit started to let go. I don't even think they hardened these. Look at the chowdering on this stupid thing. It is just garbage. $20 down the drain. I ended up causing damage to the casting to try to make these work because of all the excessive machining I had to do with my DeWalt drill. I cannot believe how stressful that was. It was a nightmare. Folks, sometimes you gotta spend the extra coin and get the good thing, the good stuff. Bolt extractor kits, extracting a bolt with a good quality kit is stressful enough. You make that even worse by buying a cheap kit. And I know better than that, but I'm like, how bad could it possibly be? Oh, you have no idea how bad it could possibly be until you've done it. And oh my God, what a nightmare that was. So I just thought I'd share that with you guys because honestly, it just made my day. Or ruined my day. Now this drill bit, one of these is a DeWalt, the other one is a Chinese knockoff. This is my DeWalt bit. I put that back in the thingy. So, we got the bolt out, and it will still, I can still thread a bolt in. That is actually as good as I'm going to get it. Where's that bolt? I had it set aside here. I just had it here. I wanted to show you guys that it, yes, does in fact still work. But here's what's left of that stud. So what had happened was the bit, I couldn't get it dead center, and then I had to drill it out even bigger, because the smaller bit didn't do the trick. So I drilled it out even bigger, and then I kind of drilled alongside the wall, so it turned it into a semicircle half moon shape. But that's what happened to that. And yeah, I'm going to throw that kit in the trash for sure. No good. So let's see what it does with a bolt. Now I'm going to take this bolt. This is one of the good head bolts. Worst case scenario, I'm going to have to drill this out a little bigger and put a helicoil in there. I don't want to start helicoiling this engine if I don't have to. So I'm going to try to torque it down to the specified torque. And if it doesn't take it, if the threads strip out, then we're going to drill it out bigger, get a helicoil, and it'll be all good. So I'm not too concerned. A lot of this stuff is fixable. So as I stated earlier, we pulled the crankshaft out, we inspected the journals, and they look pretty good. Or the bushing. Actually, they don't look that good. I'm going to show you what I mean. So this is the PTO side bearing. It's got a lot of chowdering on it, and I'm not sure why. So, you know, these are, so the way these are made from the factory, they'll get a standard size bushing, and they'll knock it into position. I believe they go in from the inside. They'll knock it in position, and what they do what's called, they ream it out with a ream. It's kind of like broaching a bushing for a clock. You know, if you're into clocks, the bushings all come in standard sizes, and then you have to broach them with a little, like a rotary file, until you get just the right fitment. And that's how they do these at the factory, from what I've been reading. Now these look kind of bad, but we're going to clean them up, and I'm going to take a little bit of emery cloth and just lightly clean up the ridges. and hopefully we won't have too much movement. Same thing with the mag plate side. So those will be okay. No concerns there. I was going to pull the camshaft out. Now, to pull the camshaft out of this engine, you've got to use a drift pin punch, and you just kind of pound it out. I do believe it's supposed to come out. After doing it, I thought it had to come out this way through the back. I think I'm wrong on that. I think it goes in through this. It comes out through the front, because as I was. It gave me full resistance all 3/4 of the way out, and I'm like, there's no way this is how it goes. So I put it back, I drove it back in, and I'm going to leave it alone. I'm not going to pull the camshaft out. I don't think that's necessary at all. So we're making progress. We're making progress. I've got some parts on order already. I've ordered the. I found a base gasket for the engine, because that's something that's pretty hard to find. So I found a base gasket, that's on order, and I've also ordered, what else did I buy? I got the front cover. And did I show you guys all those parts yet? No, I didn't. So, front cover came in. That's this guy here. Nice heavy cast iron part. And so that came in, so that's good. But yeah, I ordered the base gasket, and there was one other thing I bought, and it was no, I think that was it. Yeah, that might be it. And now today I went to the auto parts store. I got my my stupid, useless extraction tool, but I also picked up the supplies needed for grinding and lapping the valves. So we're gonna do the valve grinding. I picked up a glaze breaker. Now this isn't exactly a hone. I know I talked about honing the engine. This is a glaze breaker. So what this tool will do for us is it will bring back some of the crosshatch patterns, but it'll also clean up the cylinder bore. It'll remove any rust that we have going on there, and it'll give a nice surface for the new piston rings to seat. Yes, I did order the piston rings, so those should be here within the week. We're nowhere near ready to put this motor back together again. Oh yes, and to help with the piston ring installation, I picked up a ring install tool, and so that'll make that a little bit easier, to spread the rings the right way and slide them over the piston. And that's where we're at, folks. One other thing, I still don't know what this engine used for seals. I can't seem to find parts. Even in the parts diagram, it doesn't mention anything about a seal, and there's no provision. See, this is a drain back right here. So if I were to put a rubber seal here, the oil won't drain back into the crankcase like it's supposed to. So I just get the feeling that there is no rubber or leather seal that goes on that crankshaft. If anybody can confirm that for me, that'd be awesome. Because I don't know what I'm looking for, what the seal would even look like. So let's talk about the man behind the engine a little bit, my grandfather. My grandfather's name is Lester Bishop, and he grew up in the Pascoag, Rhode Island area. He worked throughout his adult life. He was a fireman, along with most of the other men in my family. And his day job was at a weaving mill, and he ran a. This guy was Peter Griffin's father. Definitely. Same guy. Even looked like him. He was kind of short. He was shorter than me. But he was he was basically a lifelong bachelor. He worked at his weaving mill job from the age of 20, his early 20s, all the way up until basically until the weaving mills closed down, and then he started taking odd jobs throughout the 1980s and 90s before he retired. But he worked in this weaving mill. He was a foreman, as far as I know, and he did a lot of the machine maintenance. He was a handy guy, for the most part. And but throughout his adult life, I mean, he was a bachelor. Him and my grandmother, they separated when my dad was 3, and he never married or dated until 1992. He basically kept to himself for most of his adult life. And he would eat at the same diner every day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He never cooked a meal for himself. Although he did occasionally cook beef stew for the firehouse. But for the most part, he ate at this little diner called Cerio's. And I think it's in Pascoag. And that's where most of my family is from, by the way, that area. On my dad's side. I think I already mentioned that. So anyway, my grandfather, sometime in the early 80s, he got into this hobby of collecting antique engines. And the types of engines that these guys would collect were stationary engines. Specifically gas-powered engines, not steam. He was into the gas engines. And these are engines that were commonly used to power mills. And on the bigger end of the scale, they would power mills and oil pumps, municipal water supply pumps, and all the way down to little small engines that would be used to power washing machines and small appliances in the household before the days of electricity. My grandfather had acquired a 1934 International Harvester LA engine in 1985. And it was an engine that needed very little work. He repainted it, he got the magneto rebuilt, got it running, and suddenly he started finding new friends in the stationary engine community in the New England area. And one of these shows that he would regularly attend was in Dublin, New Hampshire. And he would go pack up his tent, his little one longer engine, as he would call it, his little one long international engine. He'd throw it on his truck, his stake body pickup truck, and he'd drive up to New Hampshire and he'd display his engine. What they would do is all the people in these engine shows, all the collectors, they would take one or more engines and they would just set them on display for everyone to walk by and enjoy. And they would fire up their motors, and they would occasionally walk back to fill up the tanks and add water to the water hoppers. I went to one such engine show in 1991, I believe, with my cousin and my grandfather. So throughout the 1980s, that was my grandfather's life. He'd go to work at the weaving mill, run his shift, punch out, show up at the firehouse, hang out with the guys at the firehouse, then he'd go have dinner at the local cafe, Cerio's, still in business. And then, when he was at home, and he lived with his brother, actually. He lived with his brother right on Wallam Lake in a little cabin. And his brother was a lifetime bachelor. He never married. And he would tinker with his old engines. Throughout this period, my grandfather and my family, we weren't really that close. We lived 2 states away, and we didn't really spend a lot of time with him. It wasn't really like we were, visiting. We would visit him once in a while, and every couple of years or so, he'd come up for Christmas. But him and I were never close. And it's so funny, too, because we're very much alike. We love our solitude, and we love to tinker with machines and whatever we can get our hands on. That's one thing that they say nature versus nurture. What traits are passed on rather than acquired through life experience? And I believe that the passion for tinkering with machines and working with tools and working with your hands is something that can be passed on as a trait. Because, as I said, my grandfather and I, we were never close. my father and him were never really close either, and my dad is the same way. It's just kind of funny that way. But my grandfather, he was not an easy man to get along with sometimes. He was a very guarded, he had a very guarded personality, and he was not a warm and fuzzy guy, at least not to me. But he loved to joke, he loved to have fun, and he loved to play pranks on people. He was a good man, and he just wasn't a warm and fuzzy kind of guy. And the moments that I have spent with him have been very good quality, grandson, grandfather, moments. And it wasn't really until he got much older, I would say, it wasn't until he married. And I think by this point he was well into his 50s. And when he got married to a woman who he met in the hospital after one of his many heart attacks. Remember, he ate at the same diner every day. This woman who worked as a hospital in the administrative office of the hospital met him there, and they kind of hit it off, and they did in fact marry about a year or two later, and they both had children from previous marriages. And while I never really called her grandma, I do respect her for what she what she achieved in getting my grandfather to kind of warm up a little bit and spend more time with his family and less time with his engines. So as he got older, him and I got a little bit closer. I would visit him more often. He would visit us more often. Until he finally said, I'm getting a little bit too old to deal with these antique engines. I'd like you and your father to take them over for me. And he said that if you decide to get rid of them, let me know, and I will. He'd said under no uncertain terms, we are not allowed to sell them for profit. We can give them away if we don't need, or if we have no use for them, or we can find somebody who is deserving of these engines. And I took that to heart. I said, I agree. We'll do everything we can to keep them in the family, regardless of what happens. And we kept our word. By this point, it was 2007, and he had 2 International Harvester LAs. And he had a 1914, I believe, Deming water pump. At one point during one of the engine show phases of his life, when he had his new wife involved as well, they displayed one of the International Harvesters running a water pump, and it had this Disney-themed village set up. That was all her. He was all about the iron. She was all about the Disney. That's just kind of how it worked out. I mean, that's kind of how you would expect it, I guess. He got to play with his engines, and she got to play with dolls. It worked out for them, one way or the other. So what he ended up doing was, when he finally had enough of that, his wife ended up with cancer, and it was a 10-year battle for her, unfortunately, and she didn't make it through the other side. So she's no longer with us. So at that point, he kind of lost interest. He became withdrawn from his hobbies, engines included. And he said, what, enough is enough. So he hauled up his trailer full of engines, brought him to my parents' house, and my dad and I kind of tinkered with him for a little bit. I got the red International LA motor running again. I did that, and I mentioned this earlier in the series too, but I got that engine running, and it became my first YouTube video. It's funny because from that first video back in 2007, I just checked my account, or my history on YouTube, my income history, and I've made, let's just say this, I've made enough money on YouTube to pay cash for a brand new, well-equipped SUV. It was all from that one video. It just sort of spiraled out from there, and over the past, of course, it's been 14 years now, right? So So I got the engine. I got the International LA running, and there was another one next to it, same year, 1934-ish LA, and my dad and I started talking, and we're like, we're not really into the stationary engine hobby, and these engines are just sitting here doing nothing. So at the time I was living in a condo. I had no place to store them. My dad wanted to clean the yard up, and it was like, we need to do something with these engines. If we're not going to, what are we going to do with them? We weren't going to the shows. We weren't really setting up displays, and we're not really into that. We have our own lives to live. And my dad gave the red engine that I got running, the one that you see in my video, to my cousin. And he still has it to this day. I just confirmed with him that he does in fact still own the engine. It's had some damage, but it's fixable. I won't get into the details of what happened because it makes me sad thinking about it, and him as well. The unpainted engine, the one that was still in its original gray cast iron visage or color scheme, that engine my father gave to, actually I gave the red one to my cousin, and my dad gave the other one to his godson. Thank you. To his godson. And unfortunately that engine ended up in it didn't go, it was, I don't want to get into the details, but that engine is no longer in the family one way or the other. And it wasn't his fault. It was through some very unfortunate circumstances that engine is either in the scrapyard or it was sold to somebody, and it could be running right now. Who knows? Very sad. Not what I wanted to see happen. So, in 2013, I got this feeling that, and this is before we disbanded the engine collection. This is long before then. I got this feeling that, we should go see Grandpa, because, I don't know, we haven't really talked in a while, and I just get this feeling that we should go visit him. It was kind of one of those, we're going to do this moments, So I talked to my parents. I said we should probably go see what's, just kind of visit him, take him out to dinner or something. So they agreed. Like, yeah, we should probably do that. So we loaded up the car, drove, the 2.5 hours to his house. He was living in a mobile home community for retirees. A little backstory on that. The home belonged to his late wife's family, and it was left to her, and then she in effect left it to him upon her passing. And it was a nice little place, little 2-bedroom trailer on a little cozy lot, surrounded by blue hairs. And he seemed very, very happy to see us, and we said, hey, let's go out to dinner. So he said, well, can you do me a couple of favors? So we kind of helped him do a few things around the house. And brought him out to lunch. I know what we had to do. We had to cash, and he had a hoard of soda cans. He had he had garbage bags upon garbage bags full of aluminum cans. And he said, I've been saving these up for a couple of months at a time, and then I cash them in, and I put the money in my bank account. And he said, with this next load, I should be able to buy this TV that I've been wanting for a long time. So we're like, okay, that sounds like a nice idea. So we, my dad and I took the cans to the recycling center. We got him, I couldn't believe how much money he got. It was like a couple $100 worth of cans. And so we loaded up the van we had a minivan. We cashed in all the cans. We came back with a check for God knows how much money. And he said, I'm going to go. Can you bring me to the store so I can buy my new TV? And we're like, of course, let's go. So we had our lunch. We went to Best Buy. He picked himself up a 3D TV. This is in 2013, so mind you, it's a little dated, but he bought himself one of those fancy new 3D TVs. It was I've never seen a grown man, especially a man who reminds me of Peter Griffin's father. He's so happy, so giddy as he was when he picked out this new TV. He was so happy. I mean, he was like smiling from ear to ear as I pushed him through the store in his little wheelchair. He was at a point where he couldn't really walk that well anymore. He was again a lifelong firefighter. He served his debt to society, I guess you will, and he paid for it for the rest of his life. It trashed his lungs and just anyway. So we got him a nice new TV. He paid for it, of course. He picked out a new sound bar, a Blu-ray player, and a TV stand. So we then took all of his new equipment. We loaded it into the car, and we brought it to his house. We set it all up for him. And it wasn't maybe 2 weeks later, maybe 3 weeks, maybe a good solid month at best. We got some information from my cousin, who lives down in his area, and she was the one who took care of him, made sure his bills were paid, made sure that he had his medications, and kind of kept him, from succumbing to his own grief over the loss of his late wife. And she made sure that he was well cared for, and to that the whole family owes her a debt of gratitude. I digress. So we ended up finding out that he was in the hospital, and they said it could be cancer, and we're like, oh my God. And this was right after that visit. So we drove down. This was in, I want to say this was just before Christmas 2013. And there he was. He just kind of had this look on his face like, this is it. And he seemed to be okay with that. So we later found out that he had been sick for quite a lot longer, months actually. He knew there was something wrong, and he just didn't want to. I guess he had reached a point where he couldn't continue if he didn't have to, and I respect that. As his grandson, I respect his decision to keep it quiet, because if he had gone through, even as early as it was, if he knew it early enough, and he could have gone through with the treatment and he would have survived, he would still be the same, he was still grieving from his wife who died of cancer. It was just a bad situation all around. But, he made the decision he made, and I'm sure he's at peace with that. But, so it's kind of ironic that, I knew something was wrong long before, and I just couldn't quite put my finger on it. So, long story short, he ended up in hospice, and he told my father and I and my cousin to go to his house and take anything that belongs to him and get it out of there. So that's any furniture that was his, any electronics, any valuables that belonged to him specifically. Because he knew that once he had passed, his late wife's family was going to go through the place too. So we made sure to separate his stuff, the stuff that he had, that was his, that was promised to his family. We separated that all out on his orders. And then shortly after, his late wife's family ransacked the house. They ransacked it. We went back afterwards, and it was absolutely trashed. I was like, oh my God, they were looking for money. There was none, but that's what they were after. They were pulling up floorboards. I'm like, oh my God, what are the animals? Anyway. So, we, as we were going through the shed, my dad and I found a little parts bin from the stationary engines that we had already picked up from him that he gave us. And I was walking behind the shed. And that's where this engine comes in. So I was walking behind the shed. And I saw this under a pile of leaves. It was just buried. All I could see was the gas tank. I could see the gas tank. I'm like, what on earth? Yet another engine? And I'm like, what could it be? So I threw the leaves off of it. I picked it up, and it was filthy. I think I trashed a good pair of jeans on that one. So I'm like, Dad, we got to take this. This is his last engine. Like, we didn't even know he had this. He never mentioned having a Briggs engine. I knew what it was. I knew what it was because I had seen a picture of this engine in the engine book that he gave me. It was a Bible of antique engines, and I believe this engine might even be in that book. I didn't know what model it was offhand, but I'm like, that's a Briggs. I'm going to take that. So we brought it home after he'd passed away, and we all said our goodbyes, and we took this engine to my parents' house, and I put it in the shed. That was 7 years ago. That was 7 years ago I put it there. I just stuffed it in the shed and forgot about it. And the engine was basically forgotten until my parents sold their house and we had to clean out the shed. This was the last thing that I had to take out of there. And that is how this engine was saved. And that's basically the Reader's Digest version of the life story of the man who collected it in the first place. Now, we don't know where he got it. We don't know when he got it. We have no idea. We have no history on it. I don't know if he ever had it running. I don't know anything about it. All I know is it's a hunk of iron and it's definitely going to run again. I don't care what it takes. This thing is going to run again. And you're going to see it. You. Yes, you. You're going to see this engine run on my channel someday. I've actually gotten a lot more progress done than I expected at this point. I wasn't planning on really doing anything with it. I was going to honestly just shove it under the workbench and maybe someday get to it. But then I realized the availability of parts for an engine like this is only going to get worse. As the people who collect antique engines are dying off and their grandkids aren't picking up on the hobby, it's going to get even harder and harder and harder to not only find parts, but to find the ambition to just do it in the first place as life catches up with you over time. Speaking of, let's take a look at some of the parts we dunked in our solution. Now, as you all know, I'm a big fan of Evaporust. This stuff is awesome. This is the exhaust pipe we pulled off in a couple videos, last video actually. And look at that. All the rust is gone. Ha! I love it. Got some head bolts, some miscellaneous hardware, some spacers. All looking pretty fine. You're going to need to be zapped with the... I'm going to wash them off with hot water and then soak them in WD-40 or something. I got some split washers. I got some screws. Put that in there. Make sure I get it all. I'm not going to use this solution for another run because it's really gross. I might actually mix it with some new solution though and maybe do the flywheel cover. But at $20 a gallon, this shit's expensive, so I don't want to waste it. I'm going to dunk this cylinder head in there because it's got these iron... I don't want to take these iron pieces off if I don't have to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to soak this in there and let those iron bracket devices... I'm going to let those de-rust for a little while, and then we're going to take the whole thing and dunk it. Will it fit in that tank? No, but I'm going to have to clean it maybe by hand. Clean the aluminum and polish it a little bit. So that's what I got to do there. Let me get these parts, soak them in some WD-40. And what that's going to do is prevent them from flash rusting. You're supposed to wash the solution off, but I think this will do it. A decent enough job. So now you know a little bit about who my grandfather was, the kind of man he was. He was a worker. You know, he was born to work and work hard. And throughout his life, he That's all he did. He worked. He was not much of a family man, and I think he'd admit that. But, you know, the thing is, a lot of his traits ended up in both my father and myself. He was a very stubborn man. Once he made up his mind on something, don't try to change his mind. No, that's how it is. That's how it's got to be. Who are you to tell me what to do? You know, that's just the kind of guy he was. You know, he was a good man. He really was. But he loved his engines. He just loved his engines. You know, and you look at his shop, like he had a little workshop in this mobile home lot in the back in the shed, and he had actually, this is his actual toolbox right here. This was his actual toolbox. And I ended up with this. That was his wish. I was supposed to take it. And this is his toolbox. And now it's mine. He actually had some snap-on tools in here. Not many of them, though. He didn't have a lot of tools left. They were all stolen by his late wife's family. You know, it was unfortunate. You know, one of the unfortunate things about his situation is, like, he would never buy himself anything new. Everything he owned was used. Not abused, but used. He owned an old pickup truck when he met his now late wife, or soon-to-be wife at that point. He had an old blue Dodge pickup truck, or maybe it was a Chevrolet, two-wheel drive, strippy model, base, nothing, no options, no AC, no radio. And he was happy with that truck. He loved that truck. But his fiancée said, no, you need a new truck. So for the first time in his life, he went out and he bought a brand new truck. He bought a work truck package, basically a strippy model, two-wheel drive Chevy pickup, 1993 model Chevy. What would that have been? It would have been just a Chevy pickup, not a Silverado, or it was before they called them Silverados. 1500. It was a 1500 work truck. It was red. He picked out the color. No options. Straight 6. Or was it a V6? I think it was a V6. It could have been a straight 6, though. And that was a truck he owned for many years. He drove that pickup truck until the mid-2000s, or the early 2000s. And then, and by that point, the truck had been borrowed by his late wife's children and their fiancés, their many fiancés, and essentially destroyed by them. They would drive the crap out of it, and, you know. So it didn't really get taken care of towards the end, unfortunately. But that was his truck. He loved that little truck. He would have never bought it had it not been for her. But there you go. No, he was a simple guy. No frills. The only thing I remember about him specifically were his boots. As a firefighter, he kept the shiniest boots any man you'll ever see. They shone like the sun. I don't know how he did it. I don't know why he did it, but he did it. No, I know why. You know, obviously. I'm just making conversation. But that was him. You know, he was a very simple guy. And he didn't really ask much out of life. If he gave you a gift, he would never forget. If he gave you, I mean, when my dad was a teenager, he bought him a stereo. And may God strike me down if I'm a liar, but on his deathbed, I wouldn't be shocked if he said, "How's that stereo working?" the one that I bought you 40 years ago. On that note, I think we're going to call it a day. And we're going to revisit this engine soon in our next video, which is coming up, I swear. I'm probably already filmed it and didn't tell you. We're not going to hone this engine, but we're going to deglaze it with this Lyle deglazing tool. This is, I have to get the right, I believe you're supposed to use kerosene or some kind of a light oily substance, petroleum based. And we're going to deglaze this cylinder with this tool and see how she comes out. And actually, I believe it does tell you what you need to use. No, it does not. But we're going to give this a try. My father used one of these. I've seen him use them a couple of times on small engines, and they work pretty well. We're going to get that crosshatch pattern back so that it'll help with the oil retention on the cylinder walls for the new rings. So we'll do that. Get rid of some of the rust rings, sort of wear those down a bit, and hope for the best. And we're going to grind and lap the valves, but that'll be probably in a separate video. I'm going to try to stretch these out. And, okay. Until then, folks, have a great night.